So welcome everyone. My name is Farzana Nayani. I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant. I get to travel across the country and share a lot of information around diversity and inclusion with different organizations, schools, colleges, and corporations. And today's topic for us today is looking at how we can talk to our children about all of those topics that we're unsure about or that can be challenging sometimes. And so a little bit of background about me. As I mentioned, I'm an educator, trainer, consultant. I'm a parent at the local school here. I have 2 children, and I'm an author as well. So you can see one of the books that I've written, it's called Being All of Me, and you can flip through it today. I have extra copies so you can take a look. And it's really looking at how we can really be our whole selves if we are of different backgrounds. So it's something for you as a reference that you can look at. Today's agenda is really looking at terminology around diversity and how we can examine our own approach to looking at culture. Really, it comes down to our own parenting style, what we're comfortable talking about, and also how we can look at the developmental stages of our children and the different ages they're at. As well, we actually have been teaching the ripple effect at Richmond School, so it's really great to be able to share that with you. And finally, we are going to have a chance to practice strategies where we'll be able to get into those tough topics. So I know that some of you were at the last one, and we'll do a recap of the last one, so it'll be a great chance for us to review those really key concepts and then kind of move us forward. All right. So just as we begin, we like to open up with framing how we communicate today, and we call it practicing stars. So we like to think about sensitivity and how we listen to others, and really recognizing trust and honoring confidentiality, making sure that we appreciate and acknowledge others' perspectives, and knowing that as their truth, and we can appreciate that. Respecting others, so realizing that we're separating the person from the opinion. So when we leave here today, even though we might have a disagreement in how we perceive things or how we view our ways of dealing with things, that we can still be friends. And lastly, that there's safety in all of us knowing that these are uncomfortable topics, as we just talked about, but that we can hold the space and work through those ouch moments. All right, so thumbs up if you agree to that, and we all want to practice stars. Thank you. So diversity, if we think about how to define diversity, it's really looking at all the unique characteristics that make up a person. So that could be ethnic differences, cultural differences overall. It could be looking at language, looking at our upbringing. It could be also socioeconomic status, where we grew up, all of the different things that come into play. And really, when we look at people from the outside, we don't know what's going on underneath. So sometimes in the diversity field, we use the iceberg model, right? If you think about an iceberg, how much of it do you actually see above the surface? A very minute amount, but there's so much going on beneath it. So we use that as an analogy. This is a really great graphic, and you have it on your handout. It's the diversity dimensions. So when we're looking at the different aspects of diversity and how we can think about it in terms of us and our own identities, it really starts with personality, and that is something that differs from person to person, but the inside ring really looks at things that are mostly visible. So we're looking at age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. And I used to say that those things are very visible and unchanging, but as you know, we are looking at differing gender expression, and so there can be a spectrum of gender that can change over time. So that's something that is the internal dimensions. And in terms of external dimensions, it goes into more things like income level, work experience, even your religion, even your parental status, right? What kind of family environment you have. And then when I do work with corporations, we look at the organizational dimensions. And so this might be interesting for you to think about in terms of your own work content, your department, your management status. So all those things affect who you are, right? And when we think about diversity, it's not just race and gender, right? There's so much more to it, and so the point of this is to illustrate that. When we think about diversity, it goes hand in hand with inclusion, because you might have differences, but then what do you do with that? And so inclusion is really important to think about. It's really looking at belonging and how we can create an environment where everyone feels a sense of being a part of that and participating in that and being supported. So in terms of why we're here today, we're really looking at our own approach. And this is now a chance for you to quiz yourself. So if you could take out the handout, what I'm going to do is ask you a number of questions, and you can respond by marking it off. If you need something to write with, we can get that for you. So think about how you approach parenting and the different elements of parenting. And I have some pencils here. I got them. Okay, so think about what your approach is in terms of how you parent, right? And how you perceive differences, okay? And this is based on some methodology that is being used to look at cultural dimensions and how we respond to it with our own approach. So, number one, you're going to look at this question and write down if you agree or disagree. It's one or the other. Number one, we don't really have differences. We don't need to worry about them. This is a non-issue. Okay? Do you agree or disagree with that? We don't really have differences. We don't need to worry about them. This is a non-issue. Secondly, self-reflection. And these are two different ones. So A and B are different. A, my culture is better than others. The way my culture sees things works the best, and others can learn to be that way too. Do you agree or disagree with that? B, other people's cultures are better than my own. My culture has problems with it, so I like the other cultures better than mine. Do you agree or disagree? Number three, there are differences, but we don't need to focus on them. If we pay attention to differences, it doesn't help everyone feel included. It can make things harder, so it's better to treat everyone the same. Do you agree or disagree? Is this causing you to think here? Yeah. Yeah, it's meant to. Okay. Number four, remember, agree or disagree. I see and celebrate differences. I could use some help on how to navigate them better, but I appreciate them and I'm learning more about them. Do you agree or disagree? Okay, and the last one? Number five, I truly understand that there are differences and feel comfortable addressing them. I have practiced how and have been successful, and I'm still gaining information on how to do that. Agree or disagree? Okay, so what you're going to do is take a look at your answers and see which number question that you agreed with. And then we're going to look at them again, and you're going to pick which best describes you. Okay? So what's your approach? Number one, that we don't really have differences. We don't need to worry about it. Number two, my culture is better than others. Or, so that's 2A. Or 2B, other people's cultures are better than mine. Number three, there are differences, but we don't need to focus on them. If we pay attention to them, it actually can make things harder. So let's not focus on them. All right. Number four, I see and celebrate differences, but I can use some help to navigate them better. And lastly, I truly understand that there are differences and have practiced how to be successful. Okay. So circle the one that you are and realize that this is an approach. It's based on something called the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. And it actually equates into these different orientations. And what this does is it gives you a chance to look at how you interact with difference. And what's important is you can think of other people that you know and think about how they interact with difference. Maybe number one, they're in denial about difference, right? Or number two, they're in defense about it. They like their culture only and resist other cultures, right? And we can think about how that came to be. Maybe it's how they grew up or how the environment has shaped them to be that way. 2B is reversal, where you like another person's culture better than the one you've been brought up in, and that we see that when people travel. Number three is minimization. So we kind of want to minimize differences. And I've had parents say that to me where they've said, if I bring this up, it's going to make things worse. So I just don't want to talk about it. And you might see that in the neighborhood when you're strolling through town and people want to talk about something controversial, and we agree to just minimize it and look at the commonality, right? Now, there are pros and cons to that, of course. There are pros and cons to every approach. Number 4 is acceptance that there are differences, but we're still learning. And number 5 is that we adapt to all the differences. We accept them and we know that they're there and we adapt, okay? Now, think about the parents that you know who are on the same soccer team as you, or other parents in your class, or your neighbors, and think about how they approach differences, and then think about how you approach differences. Is it similar? Is it different? Is that an opportunity to explore and understand where there can be conflict, right? Because if someone has, for example, an idea around the news, whether it be something to do with, we're looking at parkland, or we're looking at the elections, or we're looking at different other concepts. This can be the source of where we have conflict, because someone could say, look, I believe in my way of thinking, and I'm not open to yours, but can we respect that, right? So it's important to know where we stand, because it allows us to prepare our children, right, from whatever we're comfortable with. And we're not advocating for any particular one, but just know where you are and understand the pros and cons of it. I think the first thing is understanding where people are and knowing that you may have the same values, like one of family, one of safety, one of caring, but how that's expressed can be, I'm protective of my values, you don't bother me with yours, and we're going to disagree, right? That could be one way. Another way is that I think it's harmless that I'm telling a joke, and I like you, so I'm including you in that, so be a part of that with me. So part of that affinity that's being formed is that it's based on an ism, sexism or racism or seemingly harmless words. And that's exactly what we talked about in our 4th and 5th grade assembly today, is that words and actions matter. And even though there's not a really negative intention behind something, there's a negative impact. So there's intent and impact. And when we don't address the impact, then we can't teach someone about the fact that they're harming someone else. So it is our duty to say something about that. And I have some scenarios around that where kids will harmlessly, what they feel is harmless, call names. And they say it's a joke. Why are you taking it so hard? Why is that such a big deal? Or they'll make a comment about someone's skin color or touch somebody's hair. And their intention wasn't to do any harm because they're children, but we have to help them understand that that's not okay. You can't just touch someone and not have their permission or do that and it's harmful, right? Or there's a negative slur and they heard it on the radio. That's not okay. We talked about that today and the kids got it. So your question really has to address how we deal with it with adults. And perhaps as we go on, you'll have a few more options, okay? So thank you for that question and thinking through this. Does this make sense to everyone? Okay, so use this as a framework, and I like to say that in our Facebook groups and things that we, people have their comments, and so we can almost check in with, okay, where are people at? This is just a graphic which you have that looks at how these things can play out. So ideally there is the sense of trying to bridge across difference. So understand that we do want to move along the continuum, but we do embrace where people are at. Okay, I'm going to keep going in terms of how this looks at in terms of parenting. And so really your parenting will have to take into account your perspective and also your partner's perspective. So if they are not interested in bridging differences and you are, that's going to come into play. I see some heads nodding around that because part of it is being in agreement around that. Also, knowing that your child's age and developmental level will be part of the rubric for how you deal with difference. And it can be adjusted based on external factors. So there could be things that are going on in the news that you really need to address. And you may not want to, but it comes up. And, you know, for example, my son, he's in 2nd grade. If I can share with you, he's doing his hero project, and he chose Nelson Mandela. And we did a run-through. I've been out of town, and we did a run-through recently. And for him to share about how there was inequity among whites and blacks, and that sometimes you have to stand up against injustice, it was hard for me to hear that from a 7-year-old, because I thought to myself, why does he have to know that now? Why can't he just play? But on the other hand, my heart was beaming because he grasped that deep concept, and I know that if he sees something that's unjust, he'll be able to stand up for it, right? So that's the silver lining on how difficult some of these conversations are. So know that when we're having those conversations as parents, the kids are listening, they're sponges, and they're looking to you as role models. And I ask people that, how are you behaving in the public? When you're in a restaurant and the person who's bussing the tables speaks a different language, do you acknowledge them? Or do you only talk to the waiter who speaks English? Because guess what? Our kids are watching, right? So what you do in your daily life, if you're greeting someone and you clutch your purse because you don't trust them, they're going to see who that is in terms of a pattern. Or if you cross to the other side of the street, which happens, right? So things like that, kids pick up on. So it does really look at how we deal with diversity and inclusion and what we're ready for. Your handout has what I have here, some suggested strategies in terms of age group. And what I'll do is allow you to take that home and look through it. And if you have questions, you can ask me. We have the opportunity to practice some strategies today. So what I'll do is leave this to you as a reference so you can use that as a tool and look it over. What I want to do today is really look at how we implement things. What I've brought for you to look at, it includes a number of different things. There are some really great books out there. I really recommend this one, The Great Big Book of Families. And it looks at how there are different family types, right? Some children have 2 mommies or daddies. Some live with their foster families or adopted. And it goes into different traditions and things, how we have different ways of transporting ourselves, how we deal with feelings. This is really good. I'll pass this around so you can take a look. This book is for some really serious topics, so you can look at it. It has to do with race and belonging, the touching hair thing I was able to introduce to kids today through this. It actually mentions the N-word, which is a really difficult topic, but guess what? The kids have already heard it. So if we, as parents, avoid it, our kids are going to learn from the other kids. And so sometimes we have to bring up some really difficult topics. I have some other ones around the room that you can take a look at. Creating visual representation in your child's life is important at every age. So if they see someone in a wheelchair, they're used to it. And then they know how to interact with someone in a wheelchair. But if they don't see that or imagery or books with that in there, then it'll be a foreign concept and it'll be harder for them. And you can see, for example, there's a biracial family, there's a family with 2 moms over here, et cetera, et cetera. So just try to think about that when you're introducing different books and stories and even people into their lives. So this can happen at all ages, and noticing the difference is important. We did a puppet show where we noticed different hair texture and skin color, and I explained to them that noticing difference isn't a bad thing. It actually is a great thing. Differences are great. They're not only okay and good, but they're fantastic. And so we understood the difference between noticing race and being racist. And today the kids learn that. And guess what? They know the difference now. So do we know the difference? Have we thought about it? Are we comfortable talking about noticing things that we notice is different. Today we had a discussion about this puppet. I call her Habiba, and she's wearing a hijab. And one of the fourth graders knew the word hijab and what it was about, and the tradition behind it. And I was so impressed with his knowledge, and he was able to share that with everyone in the school. So using things to introduce ideas to people can be really important. And this is real time for them, so it can be through museums, it can be through lots of experiences. So you can see fourth and fifth grade, I have some strategies around that. You can do it through looking at different customs, maybe doing your own family tree can be a useful topic. 6th to 8th grade is really embracing differences, so the different novels and movies that you share with them, really looking at how to fit in. And 9th to 12th grade is how we leverage difference. So are we prepared to work with others and look at expanding ourselves and being a part of society where we're global citizens, where there is diversity? So a couple of things I want to echo back. One is the developmental level that our children are at to be able to talk about the difficult topics, like you turn on the news and there's Black Lives Matter. And they ask about that. How are you going to explain that? Because that's not a singular conversation, right? That's a big conversation. Or the Me Too movement. And part of what I do, just to give you a skill, is I try to break it down to simple things. Like Me Too, you could say that it's about respecting everyone equally and not touching people inappropriately, like we talked about. And so just you break it down to something like that. But when it comes to brutality or inequity or historical injustice, it is difficult. And the thing that I say is, the more you talk about it, the easier it gets. And so this is now your chance. So rather than look at it as a missed opportunity, you're in the moment now, you're in the game, and what can we do? So I think having this conversation today is really powerful for you, timing-wise. And they're gonna learn and be better off for it. So if we can get past our discomfort and be able to sit in that moment with them, then we'll all grow. So that would be my offering to you. With that, there's empathy. Well, let's get to practicing, shall we? So to recap, again, we were doing teacher trainings, parent seminars, and student assemblies. Today we had scenarios. I have some for you today. Very excited to share them with you. Again, to recap, the theme we had was water, activate, transform, and empower at Richmond Street School. It's been great because we've been talking about the ripple effect. I did this where I said, hey, look at your hand and try to find a similar looking hand. And so we noticed difference, and it was natural. It was okay. It's not something we need to hide. And I said, look at my hair, not if your hair is like my hair, or shake your head if it's not. And so we noticed hair texture, and it was great. So things like that, come into play. If you haven't seen this book, it's great. It's been all throughout the school, so please take a look and get familiar with it. It's about filling your bucket through positive intentions and words and actions. And we looked at the concepts of helpful and harmful. So this is a tool you can use. Is that word helpful or harmful? Is this action that you're doing helpful or harmful? And then we talked about intent versus impact. Even though you didn't mean it, you didn't intend it, what was the impact? Look at the person's face. You can even do that in kindergarten. How does that person feel? Look at their face. All the way up through to high school, where you hurt someone's feelings, you need to say something, right? And when we're talking about looking at things where we wish we had a redo, we came up with a way of doing that where we taught the kids to pause. So the pause button in a video. So pause, rewind, and refresh the screen. And they loved it. And so they know, what? We're human. We can make mistakes. We can pause, kind of go back and try it again and say sorry. And that's a really healthy perspective, right? It's not don't talk about it. It's say, you know what? I really messed up. I made a mistake there, and I want to try that again. It's happened. I've had friends who've mistaken two people that are, both Asian, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got them both mixed up. And it was awful, uncomfortable, but they acknowledged that and, got through it, right? It's hard sometimes. we were looking at the ripple effect, being respectful, inclusive, positive, proactive, learning about others, everyone together, enjoying differences. It's been great. And a couple student scenarios we did today, we looked at accent. So when someone's making fun of someone who has a different accent and everyone laughs, how that makes the child feel. And if you're a part of that teasing, what you could do differently. So we did a rewind on that. We were looking at gender expression. So if there's a boy or girl in your class and their hair is not what you think, like the girl's hair is really short or the boy's hair is really long. And so we talked through that, and by the end we agreed it doesn't matter if the person's a boy or girl. Let's treat them with respect. It was great. And another one is just, we talked about, I call it off-limit words. And we went there and we said, look, there are some words that you can never say. You can't say them at school, you can't say them at work, you'll get fired. And they're just wrong because they're so hurtful, historically. And they were like, okay, got it. Thumbs up, you got that? Yeah, we got it. And so we talked about it. So now it's sort of like we pass it on to the parents at home and see where that'll go, right? Yeah, I didn't go through, this means that, yeah, I didn't do that. But I said there are some that you've probably heard and they did the Me Too. Yep, we've heard them. They've seen them scrawled on the bathroom walls or in the park, right? The kids know way more than we do. They listen to music. It's all everywhere, right? So to kind of close, we can look at what we've accomplished and then thinking about the ripple effect that we can have. We're filling each other's buckets by being here. So pass it along. I think the answer is we just model it. Share, tell others who weren't here, talk to our kids and debrief with them and say, you know what, Mommy, Daddy, we went to a class today and we learned about you. And can we talk more about what you learned and what you can teach me and your understanding of things, and just have that open dialogue. It's lifelong, right? There are kids for our lives, so we have every day, as a new chance to do more. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone, the PTA from Richmond Street School and myself for coming here today and sharing. If you have any more questions, I'll be around. There's my contact information. And just want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you.